Good evening. The job of trying to salvage the mission of Skylab 1 has begun. The three astronauts, Pete Conrad, Dr. Joseph Kerwin, Paul Weitz, have arrived on the scene 270 miles above the Earth, made an initial inspection, and apparently found no problems which looked unsurmountable. Their launch this morning was not quite as spectacular as those earlier trips to the moon, the Saturn 1B, which sent them aloft, being just no match in power or size for the giant Saturn V. But the job was done without a hitch.
5, 4, 3, engine sequence start. 2, 1, 0. We have launch commit and we have liftoff. The clock is running and Skylab has cleared the tower.
We got a pitch and a roll program.
Houston is now controlling.
The thrust is going all engines.
108,000 miles and 7.5 hours later, they rendezvoused just as planned over Guam with the crippled Skylab. And they found there just what Houston thought they would find. The meteorite and sun shield stripped away for the most part. The solar panel on this side of the spacecraft gone entirely. The solar panel on this side, which was to have deployed about like this and dropped the solar window shade down here, cocked at an angle about like that. The television pictures and the astronaut's description came back to Houston and confirmed just that.
Let me give you a brief description. Is you suspected solar wing 2, right? No, 2 is gone. Completely off the bird. Solar wing 1 is in fact partially deployed, and the reason that you've got different readings, not symmetric between your three solar panels, is there's a bulge of meteorite shield underneath it in the middle, and it looks to be holding it down. I think that we can take care of that with the SEVA. It looks at first inspection like we ought to be able to get it out. The gold foil has turned considerably black in the sun.
Roger, copy. Say again, Indico.
The solar cell is clear. There's some. Hey, Houston.
Go ahead.
On the vent modules, all the covers are still intact.
Roger.
The covers did not leave the vent modules on wing number 1.
Those pictures gave Houston enough information to decide whether to have one of the astronauts later on use a shepherd's crook to try to pull the remaining solar panel out to its full length. After a night's sleep tonight, the crew will venture into the crippled laboratory tomorrow and attempt to deploy the umbrella shade to bring down the temperature and make the interior livable and workable. If they can do that, their goal will be a full 28-day mission of scientific experiments and research. More work over a longer time than man has ever achieved in space. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News Space Center.
Good evening. The Skylab astronauts finally got out into space today. We'll see them go, and we'll have the pictures they took of the Skylab workshop. We'll see Elliot Richardson being sworn in as Attorney General. We'll have a report on today's White House explanation of the financing of President Nixon's San Clemente home. We'll see a Navy ammunition train, which was mysteriously blown up. And we'll have a look at the palatial Beverly Hills mansion of the late Harold Lloyd, which has been opened as a museum. Pete Conrad, Joe Kerwin, and Paul Weitz, the Skylab astronauts, left Cape Kennedy this morning right on schedule. 7.5 hours later, they caught up with the crippled Skylab workshop, which was launched on the 14th of May and which has been plagued with problems. One problem involves solar panels which produce electricity. When Pete Conrad saw the workshop today, he said that one set of panels was gone, but he hopes he can get the other set deployed. Here's how it looked this morning when they left Cape Kennedy.
T-minus 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Engine sequence start. 2, 1, 0. We have launch commit and we have liftoff. The clock is running and Skylab has cleared the tower.
Tower in Houston, Skylab 2. We fix anything. We got a pitch and a roll program.
This afternoon, the astronauts spotted the workshop, all 77 tons of it, sailing along in orbit. Pete Conrad then relayed these reports back to Earth.
Solar Wing 1 is in fact partially deployed, and the reason that you've got different readings, not symmetric between your three solar panels, is there's a bulge of meteorite shield underneath it in the middle, and it looks to be holding it down. I think that we can take care of that with the SEVA. It looks, at first inspection, like we ought to be able to get it out. The gold foil has turned considerably black in the sun. Solar cell is clear. There's something. Hey, Houston.
Go ahead.
On the vent modules, all the covers are still intact.
Roger.
The covers did not leave the vent modules on wing number 1.
Copy.
Okay, Houston, it looks like the meteorite shield at the upper vent panel on the SAS wing has wrapped around it just slightly.
Where are we?
Now, my guess is that our easiest thing to do is just go to the end and try and deploy it.
CDR Houston, we've seen enough television to let us think a lot about this. You're cleared to turn off the TV and complete any photography you haven't gotten, and you're cleared for soft dock.
So here's where the Skylab mission stands now. They are working on the electricity problem, which they may get partially solved. Tomorrow they'll work on the sunshade, which is needed if they are to continue, and the outlook for the mission is brighter tonight than at any time since it ran into trouble.
The Skylab astronauts were launched into orbit today. They promptly went to work inspecting their damaged orbiting workshop in an attempt to save the $2.5 billion project. ABC Science editor Jules Bergman reports on the day.
After 10 days of delay and frantic testing of devices to save Skylab, Conrad, Kerwin, and Weitz were up before 4 a.m. to get ready for liftoff. They had steak and eggs with fellow astronauts and talked over the long days of work that lie ahead after they rendezvous with Skylab. Suiting up before dawn, they were relaxed. After the hectic extra training they've gone through, the actual preparations for launching almost seemed easy by comparison. Right on time at exactly 9 a.m., the Saturn 1B rocket, in its first manned launching in 5 years, roared into life.
We have launch commit and we have liftoff. The clock is running and Skylab has cleared the tower.
Tower in Houston, Skylab 2. We fix anything. We got a pitch and a roll program.
The liftoff was smooth, and it disappeared into the clouds, performing exactly as the flight plan called for. 10 minutes later, when both stages shut down, the 3 astronauts had been injected into a good orbit. 7.5 hours later, after a series of engine burns on their Apollo command ship, the 3 astronauts rendezvoused with the damaged Skylab. They came up on it over Guam and rapidly closed in to fly formation so they could pin down the damage to the space station. They were able to pick out immediately that one solar wing from the workshop had been ripped off with nothing left but wires. The other solar wing was partially deployed, blocked from full deployment by debris from the meteoroid shield that had been ripped off during the launching of Skylab 11 days ago. Maneuvering the Apollo in and around the space station, Commander Pete Conrad assessed the damage.
It looks like the meteorite shield at the upper vent panel on the SAS wing has wrapped around it just slightly.
After the initial damage assessment, Conrad was given the okay to dock with Skylab. The 3 astronauts will then eat and, with engineers on the ground, plan out what they have to do next. Later tonight, they'll dock, and astronaut Paul Weitz, with the Apollo hatch open, will shoot close-up pictures and attempt to free the solar wing if it's possible to get more power. Tomorrow, they'll try to deploy the thermal umbrella to cool off the overheated space station. And then we'll begin to know whether Skylab can be salvaged and whether they can live and work in America's first space station. This is Jules Bergman at ABC Space Headquarters.
We begin with 3 men and an umbrella in space. The temperature is dropping and hopes are rising inside the Skylab Space Laboratory. That's the result of a large umbrella the astronauts put up outside their space vehicle to protect it from the sun. Temperatures inside Skylab dropped from 125 degrees last night into the 90s today. and astronauts Conrad, Kerwin, and Weitz started to prepare for their scientific work. Here's a report from Roy Neal.
Skylab astronauts Conrad, Kerwin, and Weitz have spent a busy and profitable day in their orbital workshop, turning on and checking out its equipment. Everything seems to be in remarkably good condition, even after baking in unplanned, very high temperatures for more than 11 days. The spacecraft is cooling down after a dramatic 4-hour repair job, a space first accomplished last night by the astronauts. Late last night, they took these pictures on board as they finally managed to deploy a jury-rigged orange-colored parasol sunshield outside the workshop. In position, the parasol drooped a little, but it provided enough shade in the critical area. The workshop temperatures began dropping slowly. The astronauts spent the night in their command module. Today, they turned on the television inside the workshop, and they seem to be having a lot of fun.
We've got a good view of all the food lockers now, looking straight down to the trash airlock. Okay, here comes the CDR just coming through the dome hatch now on his way. I hope he doesn't crash. You'll notice he blew that one, although we must admit that he hasn't been practicing with his soaked foam in one hand. Roger. Wow.
Today's television showed for the first time the room inside the workshop, the largest spaceship ever flown by men. The camera was at the top end, with food lockers in the foreground. 2 floors below, in the center of the picture, you can see the waste disposal lock, through which the astronauts later will throw out their trash. Early today, they described the temperature as about 105 degrees, but not unpleasant and still dropping slowly. Late in the day, it was well below 100, and by tomorrow, should be down in the 80s. That's when the astronauts hope to move in permanently and settle down to more than 3 weeks of experiments, a long stay in space, made possible by the repair job that worked. Roy Neal, NBC News, Houston.
One of the results of the Skylab difficulties is that it confirms the usefulness of having men in space, men who can repair when something goes wrong. No machine could have saved the Skylab program.
This was the 4th day in space for the 3 Skylab astronauts, and they now appear to have accomplished their first significant objective, making their threatened space station livable. The astronauts held a televised news conference today and expressed confidence in the future of the mission. ABC Science editor Jules Bergman reports.
With the TV camera looking in at their kitchen or wardroom, Pete Conrad, Dr. Joe Kerwin, and Paul Weitz were busy with housekeeping chores when the news conference began. Kerwin, the first U.S. physician to fly in space, was asked if they had trouble adapting to life in the huge workshop.
You do have a sense of up and down, and you can change it in 2 seconds whenever it's convenient to you. If you go from one module to the other and you're upside down, you say to your brain, I want that way to be up, and your brain says, okay, and that way is up. And if you want to rotate 90 degrees and work that way, your brain will follow you. I don't think it's vestibular at all.
Spacecraft Commander Pete Conrad showed people on the ground their view from the spacecraft's kitchen window.
Hey, this is really pretty out the window. I'm glad you asked about that. We're just passing over Puget Sound. It's a very clear day today. We can see Vancouver Island, I can see Coral Whitby Island, and Mount Rainier. I'm looking forward to a successful flight at Skylab of 28 days. I think we overcame our problems, and I think we will improve on what we have if we get that other solar panel out. And right now, we're in good shape, I think, to stay 28 days and complete the flight.
With the Skylab mission now turned around from failure to success, the crew began their medical experiments, the first of dozens, settling into the routine of learning to live for a month in space, which no one has ever done before. This is Jules Bergman at ABC Space Headquarters.
2 days of hectic repair work, the astronauts began moving into Skylab, their home away from home. They had their first meal in the wardroom with its picture window looking out on space and the Earth 270 miles below, and they held a news conference. Mission Commander Conrad predicted that if not this crew, then the next, equipped with the right tools, we'll be able to get a pesky solar panel out and working. Dr. Joseph Kerwin was asked how the crew is adjusting to the weightlessness of space.
You do have a sense of up and down, and you can change it in 2 seconds whenever it's convenient to you. If you go from one modulator to the other and you're upside down, you say to your brain, I want that way to be up, and your brain says, okay, and that way is up. And if you want to rotate 90 degrees and work that way, your brain will follow you. I don't think it's vestibular at all. I think it's strictly eyeballs and brain, and it's remarkably efficient. We're just passing over Puget Sound. It's a very clear day today. We can see Vancouver Island, I can see Coral Whitby Island, and Mount Rainier. Okay, we see the Pacific coast there. Well, the first thing that's obvious to me is that man can work up here, and surprisingly enough, in the workshop, we are doing what I consider a lot more physical task, that is exercising our muscles, than I thought we would, which has been one of the problems that I thought we might have. And as you might expect, I think all of us are a little stiff from using muscles that we didn't expect to use and that we don't use on the ground to hold ourselves in the proper way to use the tools and everything. There's no doubt in my mind that all the Earth resources type things that we've talked about are going to work. I've just been eyeballing out the window here at 237 nautical miles, and we do pretty good with the Mark I eyeball. Do you now feel you can complete a full 28-day mission and carry out most of your experiments? You betcha.
In case you could not clearly hear what Commander Conrad said, it was, you betcha.
Astronauts Conrad, Kerwin, and Weitz spent the day today in their Skylab workshop. They cooked, they held a televised press conference, and they checked out their equipment. And they expressed confidence that they can carry out the full 4-week mission assigned them before the space laboratory was damaged on launch. Roy Neal has that story from Houston.
Charles Pete Conrad, Dr. Joseph Kerwin, and Paul Weitz spent a reasonably comfortable day in the Skylab. The temperature was in the 80s. Mission Control told them that their electric food heater was using too much power, so they may be limited in the number of hot meals they can cook. Outside of that, almost everything else in the giant spacecraft is checked out well, including the important experimental solar telescopes, which started working late in the day. Earlier, during a lunch break, the astronauts gathered in the wardroom and turned on their television camera for a news conference from space. While floating, weightless, Dr. Kerwin was asked by Mission Control if the men had any trouble figuring up from down in that big workshop.
You do have a sense of up and down, and you can change it in 2 seconds whenever it's convenient to you. If you go from one modulator to the other and you're upside down, you say to your brain, I want that way to be up, and your brain says, okay, and that way is up.
Then the astronauts were asked to point the camera out the wardroom window and describe the view.
Hey, this is really pretty out the window. I'm glad you asked about that. We're just passing over Puget Sound. It's a very clear day today. We can see Vancouver Island, I can see Coral Whitby Island, and Mount Rainier. Well, Commander Conrad, for listeners around the world, could you tell us some benefits that Skylab will bring to mankind? There's no doubt in my mind that all the Earth resources type things that we've talked about are going to work. I've just been eyeballing out the window here at 237 nautical miles, and we do pretty good with the Mark I eyeball. And I think with our sensors that we'll be able to do the tasks that we set out to do, especially the visual tracking. And, of course, we haven't been able to fire up the solar telescope yet, but I have understanding from the ground check out that it all appears to be in good order, and I'm sure that we're going to bring good data back from that. So I'm looking forward to a successful flight at Skylab of 28 days. I think we overcame our problems, and I think we will improve on what we have if we get that other solar panel out. And right now we're in good shape, I think, to stay 28 days and complete the flight.
Temperatures in the orbiting Skylab space station today registered 88 degrees, about 18 degrees hotter than would have been the case had Skylab not had problems. But astronaut Pete Conrad said the heat level will not interfere with completion of the 28-day mission. As the crew continued its tasks, 6 young men at the University of California at Davis emerged from a 3.5-month test of man's ability.
Volkswagen.
The Skylab astronauts spent their 6th day in space taking pictures of the Earth and the Sun. Temperatures in the cabin were in the mid-80s, and Commander Pete Conrad said he was no longer worried about overheating. Much of the work schedule aboard Skylab was canceled today, and the astronauts are experiencing a kind of brownout. Fans in the cabin have been shut off despite temperatures in the 80s, and the astronauts have orders to save whatever electricity they can. There's a possibility that power problems could curtail all 3 scheduled Skylab missions. Here's more from Roy Neal in Houston.
The Skylab astronauts have had to face up to an increasing shortage of electrical power in their orbiting workshop. Today they had to cut out some important planned studies of Earth resources. 2 of 18 batteries on board have failed, and some of the rest are running down faster than expected, so they have to be charged more frequently. That's why planners in mission control had to cut back. Apparently, there's not much that can be done to fix the electrical power system that is working to make it work better. So a high priority has now been given to a second main system that's not working, the solar wings on the main body of the spacecraft. During launch, one was knocked off, the second was jammed. A team of astronauts has been working to find a way to get the jammed wing to swing up and out. If they come up with a solution, Conrad and Weitz will go outside the workshop in their spacesuits, perhaps as early as Sunday, and try to fix it. If they can't, the second crew to go up will have to take special tools because the wing repair job has become so important. The second system has its own set of batteries and chargers. Without power from them, the entire Skylab program will be extremely limited. On the plus side, today the astronauts were able to use their solar telescopes. They sent back television showing the commander, Pete Conrad, working the complicated controls, sighting the sun, and sending back pictures like this one, a coronagraph, blocking out the sun's rays so that scientists could study the corona, much like an eclipse of the sun here on Earth. Tomorrow, the astronauts are scheduled for a day off in space, but they may put the television camera that made these pictures outside for a good look at the jammed solar wing that has become so important. Roy Neal, NBC News, Houston.